All right. It's called to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Ed Honey,
Here.
Mayor Tom Murphy,
Here.
General Ted Maxwell,
Here.
Mayor Joe Whitfield,
Here.
Chairman Peter Yucapicio,
Here.
Mayor Regina Romero,
Here.
and Mayor Paul Diaz.
Here.
Oh,
And supervisors.
and Supervisor Scott.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
will then. We're pledged.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Of the audience, the next one. Ready?
Mr. Chair, Jamie's gonna take care of that if we have anyone.
Mr. Chair, we do not have any speakers for the call to the audience.
Move on to our next item. Approval of the May 25th minutes.
I move to approve.
Second.
Mr. Chair, I have some corrections.
Okay.
To the meeting minutes. Few corrections to the meeting summary. And I'll give this to Jackie after I continue, do the description at the top of page 3 of the May 23rd meeting summary. It says that Mayor Romero said that keeping it light doesn't set goals and doesn't think it's appropriate to not add any further information or strategies in terms of developing multimodal components of the RMAP. Please change this paragraph to Mayor Romero said that keeping it light doesn't set goals, period. She doesn't think it's appropriate to not add any further information or strategies. In contrast, goal 4, in terms of developing multimodal components of the RMAP, has 8 strategies based on input that I have given, or she has given, at this table about how slim any detail on environmental justice planning and to continue having such a flimsy strategy is contrary to what a PAG board member has been asking this organization to do. I'll provide a printed copy for you. Another one on page 4 between the paragraphs, the third paragraph that begins with Supervisor Scott asked that the 4th paragraph that begins with motion was made, please add the following. Mayor Romero asked if any PAC committees were given the opportunity to work on Title VI and environmental justice planning, and if anyone was able to give feedback and input on the overall work program, and specifically on Title VI and environmental justice issues. Mr. Mugimi responded that every document goes through a committee process before being finalized. Okay,
Okay, motion was made second. All in favor, say aye with the amendments or the corrections.
thank you.
Aye. Okay, nays. Let's have it. Thank you. We'll move on to number 5. Consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, this is for information only unless anybody has any questions. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any. No action required.
Yeah. Move on to number 6. The mobility plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeanette will give us an update on the status of the long-range plan. Thank you, Jeanette.
All right, thank you, Farhad. Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council, hello again. My name is Jeanette Duren, Transportation Planning Director here at PAG. Just here to provide a quick update on all the happenings of the RMAP since we last met. Since this committee last met, we do have a few significant activities. First, following this body's approval of the population projections, our team began the process of refining those population projections for census designated places. So as you remember, the county population projection came in, the jurisdictional population projections came in, and now we're refining those even further down to the designated places. The Pop Tech Committee will be meeting next month to go over this work and continue discussions on those population projections. Pop Tech will also discuss the inputs to the land use model. This effort requires a great deal of cooperation with your team. So we do appreciate working with our partners and all the hard work that your teams have provided into this effort. The inputs into the land use model include information pertaining to development, redevelopment, permits, existing and future land use, and some other components as well. But due to the cooperation we've had with our jurisdictional partners, the model includes the most up-to-date and detailed information. So we'll continue to work together and make sure that those updates come in and are incorporated appropriately. We'll continue to work on data updates for that model. So it's an ongoing process. As you all know, the RMAP takes 4 years. And so we are constantly putting the most up-to-date information into our work. We've also really worked closely on our methodology for refining and assessing redevelopment areas. So that's been a challenge in the past, where how do we incorporate redevelopment into the land use model? It's not as simple as regular development permits and plans. So our team has worked together on that, and we'll be discussing that further at PopTech next month. As mentioned in my last update to this group, updates to the RMAP Project Explorer tool have been made. And since that time, we've opened the Project Explorer for our TPC partners to go in and load the projects. So they have actually begun loading their projects, and we're really happy to see folks logging in. And we have also seen some new staff signing into that. And we will have a training set up for, I believe it's going to actually be next week. So we will provide opportunities for our TPC partners to work directly with us and then ask questions as we get those projects into the Explorer. As we all know, and I've probably mentioned a dozen times to this group and to all audiences talking about the RMAP, all projects that are programmed through the TIP have to be in the long range plan. So it's a process to build that project list and to continue to refine it. Details on the projects that we're getting right now are costs, scope, and location. And those are sort of the valuable first steps and inputs into that project list. And as with PopTech, we're also looking at getting the latest and greatest data sets into the Explorer. So all of our performance measured data goes into that Project Explorer. And so those data sets get updated. Most data sets are yearly, but we're constantly getting those in. For instance, we just got crash data from ADOT. We get freight data quite frequently. So we're updating the Explorer as we go along. The RMAP finance plan was built last year, and we wrapped that effort up at the beginning of this year with assistance from TPC. And right now we are updating that with the actual revenue numbers from this past year. So that is something we consistently do. We update the methodology. We have our TPC partners agree on how we're going to project our revenue. And then as we get the actual numbers, we update. So we're in the process of doing that as well. As always, coordination with the RTA Next effort is always ongoing. Most specifically, because the RMAP requires fiscal constraint, the cost estimation work that Rick and his team are doing will be important into keeping the project details as up to date as we can. Any other project details, including projects that are already programmed or already under construction, we try to keep those numbers as up to date as possible. So our projects that are in the future 30 years, we're looking at planning level cost estimates, whereas projects that are in the TIP that are under construction or ADOT projects will have much more detailed cost estimates that will incorporate into that. And we're very grateful for the TPC and their contributions thus far. We've been meeting regularly with them, and we'll continue to work with our PAG technical committees throughout the process, including PopTech and TPC specifically. That's all the updates I have this go around. If you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Questions? I have a question.
Sure.
Does this regional plan go 5 years, 10 years, 15, or is it a 50-year?
It's a 30-year plan, but we update it every 4 years.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on the population updates that you're doing right now, obviously down to the CDPs and getting that, will that affect the numbers we use in revenue projections for RTA Next?
I'm going to defer that to Farhad.
Happy to, Mr. Chair. Mr. Maxwell. So the population projections were approved last time. We used those obviously for long-range planning purposes. The revenue projections were developed by Eller College, and they update their revenue projection every 3 years. But based on our conversations with them, I don't believe that there'd be an impact. There's not that much of a difference in the growth projections from the last update. But when we do the next update, obviously they will take a look at that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 7, Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Regional Council. I appreciate the opportunity to provide a brief legislative update. Hopefully you can hear me. If you can't, just do this and I'll hold the microphone. I'll try to speak up though. And I'm filling in for David Zinda, who always does an excellent job with these. He's out today. Today is day 200 of the state legislative session that began on January 3rd of this year. This is the longest session in state history. The previous record was in 1988 at 173 days. Bills introduced this session totaled 1,672. Of those, 202 have been signed and 143 have been vetoed. At the May meeting, David reported on the passage of the fiscal year 2024 state budget, which includes one-time appropriations for various transportation projects. For example, these include $89 million for the I-10 widening project between Casa Grande to Chandler, $10 million for the I-10 Cortara Road traffic interchange, $15 million for the Drexel Road bridge improvements, and other projects throughout the state. As you all may know, the legislature is currently in recess and is likely to return next week, and I'm reading probably Monday. In addition to administrative matters, it sounds like there may be another attempt at a bill that would allow for the extension of Proposition 400 in Maricopa County, which is set to expire after 2025. Proposition 400 generated $665 million last year, so loss of this revenue could strain other state revenue sources distributed throughout Arizona. Now, turning to some bills we have been watching, this list has been narrowed down from our report in May. All three deal with limiting the amount of transportation funding. Senate Bill 1312 establishes prohibitions on considering vehicle miles of travel in transportation or land use planning, recording a person's vehicle miles of travel, and imposing a fee or tax based on vehicle miles of travel. This passed out of the Senate as well as the Transportation and Infrastructure House Committee. This also passed out of the House Committee of the Whole before the legislature temporarily adjourned in June. So we'll continue to watch this one if there is any movement. Senate Bill 1340 prohibits a county board of supervisors from granting an application to construct a toll road if the proposed toll road will be converted from a publicly funded or maintained street or highway. This prohibits ADOT from entering into a public-private partnership agreement that allows the conversion of an existing publicly funded or maintained street or highway to a toll road, including a conversion to implement a traffic management strategy as prescribed. And this was signed into law by Governor Hobbs on May 8th. And finally, Senate Concurrent Resolution 1018. This would be subject to voter approval and would constitutionally prohibit the imposition of a tax or fee based on vehicle miles traveled and any rule or law that monitors or limits a person's vehicle miles traveled. This passed out of the Senate and also passed out of House Committee, so we'll continue to watch this as well. That concludes my report. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Brown, thank you very much for making reference in your report to the fact that if Proposition 400 is not reauthorized in Maricopa County, it could have a deleterious effect on state revenues that all of us depend upon. And I think it has been unfortunate to see some members of the legislature try to micromanage the components of the MAG package, even despite the objections of mayors and local officials of both political parties in Maricopa County. And I would encourage my colleagues, if any of you have any relationships with members of legislative leadership, that you encourage them to work with MAG and work with the governor so that this can move forward, because all of us are going to suffer if it does not. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments, questions?
I guess it's gonna last another day, the session. in regards to replacing the representative that resigned and moving on to other things. Betty Villegas will be sworn in on Monday. State rep. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to attach myself to the comments made by Supervisor Scott.
Any others? Or none? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next on the agenda is item 8, executive session. We have to say all in favor. Go ahead.
You do need a vote to go into the executive session, yes.
So move.
Second. Favor say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. We're in executive session. Motion.
Motion
Second.
to,
Third, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nays. Thank you. Now we need another motion to go back into the agenda.
So look.
Second. Favor?
aye.
Nays. Thank you. We'll reconvene our meeting now. Any other, I think what we asked for, that's what we come back, to a small report of what our study session.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, members of the regional council, that successfully concludes the council's 360 review process, and your staff will move forward as discussed in executive session.
Thank you. Any questions? We'll move on to item number 9. Chairman, all in favor, say aye.
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 Nays. Ayes have it. Thank you.
Should last about 30 minutes, I think. Everybody back. General, if you want to speak at this meeting, you have to kind of wave your hand. I can see everybody else, but you have to, it's like little kids in school. You have to kind of,
Understand them.
Kind of
John.
uh,
Kids stated.
we'll call the meeting to order. And second item is call to the audience. Jamie, I think we have one.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have Priscilla Storm. And if you don't mind, Jamie's gonna give the instructions and then you can proceed. Thank you. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you, Bar. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Speakers are limited to a 3-minute oral presentation and may submit written comments of any length for the board's files. Call to the audience is limited to 30 minutes. Individual board members may respond to criticism made by those individuals who have addressed the board. However, the board will not discuss or take action on a matter raised during a call to the audience that is not already on the agenda. Please start your comment by stating your name for the record. After that, you will have 3 minutes to address the RTA board. At the 2-minute mark, I will politely cut in and request that you wrap up your comments. You may now proceed with your comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Honorable Mayor Honey and members of the RTA board. My name is Priscilla Storm and I live at 6778 North Corte Calabaza in Casas Adobes. I'm a proud member of District 1 in Pima County. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak and thank you for all the work that has been done by so many to get to where we are today with RTA Next. I've submitted written comments, which Jackie has handed out at you, and I hope you will consider them. I wanted to give you a brief overview of those written comments today. The magnitude of transportation needs that we're going to be facing in the next 20 years and the crisis in transportation funding deserves your serious consideration of more than a half cent. Extending the tax that we used in 2006 to the year 2046 is a reduction, not an extension. I want to remind us all that we really are a region, and I'm proud that we live a regional lifestyle. Sales tax generation does not correspond to population and voter residency. Our tourists and students and seasonal visitors, including the 400,000 plus that live in unincorporated Pima County, are proud shoppers in our cities and towns. Please consider adding a primary jobs support component and allocation into the plan. This would recognize what each one of you are doing in workforce development and economic development to try to bring new and expanded employment and local jobs closer to home and where your constituents live. I know you have an environmental and economic aspect, but it'd be nice to just acknowledge that because I know that's an important part of what we're doing as a region. Finally, the important work that lies ahead is getting input from the voters and the taxpayers. And there's probably more work to do after you wrap up the plan and the work that's being done by the CAC, TMC, and you as the RTA board. So I hope that work will be concluded and we can get it out to get input on the recommended plan from the taxpayers and voters.
I apologize for the interruption. You're at 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And that there can be input and the plan can be finalized. There's about 90 weeks between now and May 2025. Once we have that final plan, we're going to need to do a voter education. We're going to need to fundraise for that campaign. There's a lot of hard work ahead of us. We need a disciplined timeline, and I'm sure that there's going to be enough work to fill each one of those 90 weeks between now and the shared regional goal of reauthorization success. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you. You understand? Move on to item 3, approval of minutes.
Before we move on to item 3, if I could just take a point of personal privilege, since I was late coming back to the end of the regional council meeting, I just wanted to publicly acknowledge the work of our council, Mr. Benavides, in overseeing the process of the 360 review that we did for the executive director. He had to collect and collate responses, not just from all of us, but from Mr. Mogini's peers, from members of the senior management staff, and also Mr. Mogini's self-assessment. It was a task that I'm sure took up a lot of Mr. Benavides' time, and I just wanted to publicly acknowledge his efforts in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. The next item is item 3, and it's approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of May 25th and the special meeting of June 22nd. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve.
There, Mr. Chair, I have some addition and changes.
Please.
Thank you. So I have a few corrections to the June 22nd meeting summary. I will again provide a copy to Jackie so that she could put it into the record. On page 3, the summary says Paul Diaz, mayor of South Tucson, confirmed that he did sign a letter of support, but the support was actually directed at affordable housing, not necessarily the light rail itself. If I may, based on the transcript provided by the RTA of what Mayor Diaz said, the change should be to the last paragraph. Paul Diaz, mayor of South Tucson, confirmed that he did sign a letter of support for the light rail, and that the concern in South Tucson has been about affordable housing, not necessarily the light rail itself. Those are two separate issues, and most of the discussion was about affordable housing, not about high capacity transit. In the last paragraph of page 4, please strike number 3660. Mr. McGovern did not specify which high capacity transit project he was referencing, and strike this portion of the sentence at the end of this paragraph at the top of the page, on page 5, because it was not included in the framework that was adopted by the working group and by the CAC. In other words, end the sentence with, it does not show up in the name projects as of this time. In the third paragraph of page 5, strike she believes, and this is referencing Mayor Romero, myself. This statement was not based on my belief. I was stating a fact, so change she believes to she stated. Bottom of page 5, top of page 6, modify the sentence in the paragraph summarizing what Mr. Ted Maxwell said. From the current, if the city's priorities is truly a HCT, which would mean that they're ranking that ahead of some named corridor projects and that are already on the list. And his opinion is that the city may want to take some of those off the list to make room for HCT. Change 2, based on the transcription, if the city's priority is truly HCT, which would mean that they will come out of the funds available from the transit element, or they're ranking that ahead of some of the city's named corridor projects that are already on the list. And his opinion is the city may want to take some of those off the list to make room for HCT.
Any others? So we have a motion and a second with the clarifications and verbiage from Mayor Romero. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item 4 is consent agenda. Mr. Bagimi.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is again for information only. No action is required unless there's any questions.
Okay. Item 5, approval of the intergovernmental agreement.
Mr. Chair, Rick Ellis will give you an update on the IGAs in front of you today, and this is an action item.
Thank you, Mr. Mogherini. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. Appreciate the opportunity to present to you. This time around, we have 4 IGA documents and their accompanying resolutions ready for your approval. As always, we've been working with the staff for the various jurisdictions on this, and I'll give you a quick summary of what we've been doing and what's in front of you right now. The first one that's up is an IGA for 22nd Street from Camino Seco to Houghton, and it's to get design activities underway on that period 4 project. The second one is our annual amendment for the maintenance of effort from Pima County for the transit, regional transit, and the special needs transit services. And then our next 2 are associated with improvements in South Tucson that are being proposed. And essentially, the first one is a termination agreement that's necessary to cancel prior efforts, and then reallocate those funds to the amendment effort that will go forward and do safety improvements on South 10th Avenue and other associated streets. So as I mentioned, we've reviewed all those with the associated staff or the respective jurisdictions, and it's now ready for your approval. This time I can answer any kind of questions you may have.
Question.
Move to approve.
Second. Moved and seconded to approve. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimously.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving right along. This next one will take 5 minutes. RTA next plan update. Mr. Bagimi and Baki Rico.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Puck is going to give you an update, and again, we're available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right, Mr. Chair and members of the board? A little bit more? Good. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to provide you a brief recap of the RTA Next activities as of your last meeting on June 22nd. So on June 26th, the CAC met and we provided a recap of the framework that had been recommended by the Ad Hoc Technical Management Committee Working Group back on May 31st. And this was the same one that was adopted by the CAC on June 5th. At that meeting, an alternative proposal was submitted by an informal group of CAC members. And that alternative proposal was presented and discussed. A side-by-side comparison of that alternative proposal was presented, which compared the previously approved framework. That was discussed and reviewed, and after discussion, the CAC provided a motion that approved the alternate proposal with a condition to raise the RTA current half-cent sales tax to 1/10 of a cent, to 6%, to include the funding for the named roadway projects, which would include the deferred projects and the contingency fund, as was outlined in the adopted June 5th framework. In addition to that, a TMC of the full committee was held on July 12th. The TMC also received a presentation of the side-by-side proposal, and they also were presented with the motion that the CAC made on the June 26th. At that meeting, after discussion, the TMC made a motion to move forward to you, the board, the recommendation that the RTA Ad Hoc TMC Working Group had made back on May 31st, and that had also been adopted by the CAC on June 5th. This is the motion that was consistent with the RTA regulations and the RTA board directives, and it was also aligned with the regional desire for the continuation of the existing half-cent sales tax. In addition, the TMC recommended that if the CAC could not come up with the amendments to the adopted framework that met the RTA's requirements and eligibility aligned with your direction prior to today's board meeting, then the TMC said that the recommendation would stand and that the TMC would move forward with the RTA Ad Hoc TMC Working Group and also TMC approved framework. In addition, the TMC also discussed the high capacity transit projects and reaffirmed that they were included in the working groups, that neither of them were included in the working group's recommended framework. At this time, Mr. Chair and members of the board, what I wanted to do is just quickly go through the side-by-side that you have in the packet. And then we have our CAC chair, Tom McGovern, and our two CAC TMC liaisons available for additional information. So I put together this side-by-side. On the left-hand column is the RTA working group recommendation that was made on May 31st by, again, the TMC ad hoc working group. This was the one that was adopted by the CAC on June 5th, and then by the TMC on July 12th. The left-hand column is consistent with RTA regulations and RTA board directives, and it also has the continuation of the existing half-cent sales tax. In the middle column, we have the motion that was passed by the CAC on June 26th. And then on the right-hand column, we have the feedback. So that's the setup for each of the elements. So this is the roadway element. As you know, the roadway multimodal corridor element projects are at 1.2 billion. And the deferred projects are at 230 million. The CAC's proposal has the multimodal roadway element at 1.13 billion. This includes 446.2 million for capacity enhancements, 81.6 million for operational, 134.8 million for new roadway, 457.2 million for modernization, and then an additional 10 million for bus pullouts. This funds the roadway corridor element projects as recommended by the working group on May 31st, 2023. It also adds 10 million for bus pullouts. This category was moved from the safety element to the roadway corridor element. And then it does fund the deferred projects at 230 million. Moving on to the safety element. The safety element was allocated at 150 million with the categorical budget for RTA eligible projects. The CAC's proposal has the safety element at 160 million, and it includes two sub-elements. One is speed management for 65 million, and the other is corridor or intersection safety improvement for 95 million. The feedback that we're providing is that, again, as a reminder, it moves the 10 million for bus pull-ups to the roadway corridor element. And by creating two new sub-elements, it increases by 20 million, which includes the bus pull-outs. In addition, the speed management sub-element that is being proposed may not be RTA eligible, and the definition may need to be clarified. Also, the reconstruction must be justified based on infrastructure condition to be eligible. And then finally, the corridor and intersection safety improvement sub-element under this element. Just as a reminder, if corridors are to be considered, they must be named on the ballot for the RTA statute. And then intersection safety improvements must be justified to be eligible. Moving on to the environment element, the allocation for this element was 30 million. The CAC's proposal is 60 million. This includes 40 million for wildlife linkages, and then a new sub-element called infrastructure to improve climate change resilience and preparedness for 20 million. Again, our feedback is that it increases the environmental element by 30 million and creates new sub-elements. This new sub-element does need to be clarified a little further, was our request. And also this new sub-element needs to be transportation related, and reconstruction must be justified based on the infrastructure to be eligible. The next element is the transit element. The allocation for this was 510 million, the categorical budget for RTA eligible services. The CAC's proposal provides 691 million for public transit. And it's broken down into capacity enhancement transit for 115.5 million, operational for 20 million, new transit connections for 115.5 million, continuation of existing service for 370 million, and then 70 million for regional high capacity transit. For this element increases transit by 181 million and it creates new sub-elements. The capacity enhancement sub-element does not explain what these are and how they enhance transit services is our feedback. And the same with operational. It doesn't explain what these needs are and how they're going to enhance transit services per the RTA regulations. In addition, for the transit sub-element, some of them are inconsistent with the recommendations of the CAC Transit Element Subcommittee. They're also inconsistent with PAG's adopted long-range transit plan, the LRRTP, as well as the PAG long-range regional and accessibility plan, which is the RMAP. And then finally, for transit, for the regional high capacity, it does not explain if this refers to a streetcar, a bus rapid transit system, or something else. And if the dedicated lanes proposed are on State Route 77, for example. Moving on to debt services, small business administration and admin cost element, this was allocated at 110 million. The CAC proposed the same, so this is consistent with the previously adopted framework. For the active transportation element, there was an allocation of 90 million. The CAC is proposing 102 million for this and creates two new sub-elements, the connectivity and compliance enhancements for 51 million and dedicated infrastructure improvements for 51 million. What this does is it increases the active transportation funding by 12 million and it creates the new sub-elements. Again, the connectivity and compliance enhancement is not RTA eligible and RTA cannot supplant for compliance responsibilities. For the second sub-element, it must be justified based on infrastructure condition to be eligible. This is the dedicated infrastructure improvements. This is if it involves reconstruction. For contingencies, the allocation was 100 million. The CAC is proposing the same. This is consistent with the previously adopted framework. And then finally, the grand total, again, the RTA directive was 2.34 billion. The CAC proposal with the 1/10 cent sales tax is 2.59 billion, and which increases it up to approximately 250 million over the board approved budget. This 250 million is added to the categorical elements with the proposed 1/10 of a cent increase, which, as you know, requires your approval. At this point, Mr. Chair and members of the board, again, the CAC chair is here, as are the TMC CAC liaisons, if they would like to provide any additional information or if you have further questions. Thank you.
Please, if either one of you wish to speak, please come up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wanted to let the board know that the CAC attempted to meet earlier this week on Monday and was unable. We got into session and then had to go out immediately because of loss of quorum. Our intention at that meeting was to both look at a completion of some of the question marks perhaps that Aki pointed out with the proposal which had been approved back in June by the full CAC, as well as to identify an actual half-cent sales tax proposal. The feedback from the Technical Management Committee was such that there could not really be a side-by-side comparison of the two projects, of the two proposals, because obviously there was a difference of hundreds of millions of dollars of funding between the two. And there were some assumptions initially made by the CAC proposal, which would have been really only properly decided by this body. So things like an extra 1/10 of a cent is obviously not the CAC's purview, but rather the board's. And you can, if you wish, take that as a suggestion or a recommendation from the committee. But additionally, there were some conversations about creating enough money for the proposal through the elimination of a contingency fund and a few other suggestions like rescoping of projects and a few others. Those are in most cases policies, which was also on our agenda for Monday, to identify what those policies are so that they could be paired with the proposal that was provided and also provided to the board as suggestions from the committee about the difference between a 0.5-cent sales tax proposal from us, as well as comparing that then to the 0.6 that Rocky has just shown. So that's really all I wanted to do to bring you kind of full circle to where the committee is now, but more than happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, well, just a quick question. I know you hope to learn lessons from the past. You know, we had a pandemic and a great recession. So I would certainly be adverse to cutting into the contingency money, because we've, you know, even though I think we thought we built in some good contingency money, I know we've not rescoped, but we looked at a couple of our projects in RTA next, and they're coming in at 43 to 100% more just over the last year. You know, so we look at the future. So certainly would not be in favor of anything that would be touching the contingency. If anything, I think we would want to have a discussion on building a extra contingency so we don't get into the same problem that we did in this last 20 years.
Mr. Chairman, Mayor Murphy, the logic which informed that part of the CAC proposal actually had to do with the belief, I guess, that there would actually then, with that 100 million that is recommended for future contingencies, would be in essence doubling contingency application to the projects, which also have their own construction contingency. So I think that was the logic that was employed in suggesting that it could be removed.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair. This isn't a question for Mr. McGovern, but I meet with Ms. Lesher and Ms. DeBonis, Mr. DeBonis, sorry, and other members of our staff prior to any RTA board meeting. And Ms. Lesher and Mr. DeBonis are both members of the TMC, and their understanding was that the TMC passed a motion to approve the framework recommended by the TMC's working group and allow the CAC to continue discussions and bring back additional information to the TMC as needed for further discussion. That was agreed to, but everything after that is not their understanding of the TMC's motion. So I certainly hope that Mr. DeBonis and Mr. Rosema will address that when it's their turn to speak to us, because it was something that came up when we were talking in preparation for this meeting.
Mr. Chair. General. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd actually ask right now if we could get the representatives of the TMC to come up and talk about what they thought their motions were and weren't. I think I know I'm going to want to have a much deeper conversation on where we stand right now, since I have noticed this is also for action regarding the recommendations. But I'd like to hear from them first, and then please, before we start talking.
Mayor, members of the board, good afternoon. Happy to be here, Carmine DeBonis. So the TMC discussion had a lot of different elements to it. And as you've seen every step of the way, there's much discussion on how to put together a plan and make a recommendation to the RTA board. And so the outcome of that was that the TMC felt very strongly that there was a deadline in which we were asked to make a recommendation to this board, and that we would do that with the previously approved framework, the ad hoc working group previously approved framework, and the one that was endorsed by the CAC prior to their June action with the alternative proposal. The discussion also included elements around the 6.6 cents versus the 0.5 cents. There were some different viewpoints, there were some different viewpoints on that particular element of it. And so no specific action was taken there. The direction was clear that the CAC should continue working. So the June proposal by the CAC recommended moving dollars around between the various elements of the plan, but did not specify how those dollars would be shifted. So reductions in the roadway corridor element, for example, to fund those additions in the non-roadway elements. So the TMC was not able to take action in recommending that plan and wanted the CAC to go ahead and continue their work and bring forward any additional recommendations that they may have. So I think as Supervisor Scott was referring in the slide that you saw from RTA staff, it indicates that the TMC indicated if the CAC could not bring forward a plan, that then the TMC plan would stand. That was not necessarily part of the motion, but by extension, that would be the result of it. So if there's not a plan for you to consider by the CAC today, then the TMC has taken action and recommended the previously approved ad hoc working groups framework. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. DeBonis, oh, sorry.
General Maxwell and then Mayor Romero.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I may just take a couple moments to talk some frustrations and to lay out some things that I hope will be some of the framework for our discussion today, because what I heard you just say is what I understand, having watched the TMC's discussion, was this is what we're going to do if there's nothing from the CAC. We knew the CAC was going to come back. If they come back with a plan or something else, really was it, there's more work to be done. Beginning, there's three issues that I think we need to address today. Three issues. One is the timing. We've got this July deadline that we put on them, which one I don't ever really recall us being firm on a July deadline. I've heard Supervisor Scott talk about if the CAC and the TMC need more time to do it. I've heard myself mention that, and I've heard Chairman Mahoney at the last meeting even said if they need more time, they've got more time. I believe we have failed as a board to establish the timeline we're looking at. The first thing we have to do is establish when it is we're trying to get to the ballot. At this point in time, I think we'd all agree there's no way we're going to be on in the spring or summer of 24. I was going to ask the question, but I won't, but I'm going to make the statement that I don't believe any of us have any desire to be on the ballot in November of 24. Which means the earliest we're looking at getting to the ballot is probably spring of 25. And that does give us a second shot if things don't go well, then before we lose the RTA funding. If we establish that as our first goal and objective and now back this off, then we can give both the CAC and the TMC a real deadline that they have to come to agreement. There were decisions made based on this July 1st deadline, which to me is nothing more than just a date we kind of put this. So that's on us. The other thing is the 0.6, the 1/10 of a cent increase that was proposed by the CAC got a lot of folks talking again. Well, it's not their decision, that's ours. If we need to have that discussion sooner than later and let them know that the half cent is what we want, or if there's a stomach to consider going higher, then they can continue to discuss it. But we as a board have not created that policy. And I think at some point we need to. But most importantly is if we take action today to approve one of these two plans, we're setting a plan up for failure, because the moment we get the accurate numbers of these projects, we will have to start all over. I've talked to different entities. Some believe there is a plan that if we have the numbers come in too high, we're just going to start at the bottom of a priority list. And some have said that's not exactly how it went down. So I don't know what the answer to that is. But I do think the number one thing we need to do is get accurate numbers for these projects, because we all know the numbers we're using right now to create what's a very tight, physically constrained plan are inaccurate. So those are the three big issues that I would ask for us as a board to at least discuss today. And we've got the folks in the room who have been part of these discussions. They know what our either decisions or lack of decisions of impact it's had on them. And I do believe the most important thing is that we get those accurate numbers before we go forward with any kind of plan, which gives us an opportunity to now go back to these two groups, let them continue the work, and for them to come up with a roadmap to how they can get to an agreed upon plan by the real deadline we give them. So, Mr. Chair, I appreciate you giving me some moments time kind of to get on a discussion, but those three issues to me are three answers we owe it to them.
Mayor Romero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to ask about the discussion in terms of the TMC and the CAC not being able to really align in terms of the investments and the plan that we are going to move forward with. I believe that the compromise proposal that was voted on, or the consensus proposal that was voted on and supported with an 18-6 vote by the CAC, it's promising, but I agree with General Maxwell that we, the board, have to answer some questions first. First, when is it that we are going to have this election? And what concerns me the most is that we have not been able, either the TMC or the CAC have been able to find a true consensus based on technical management and community. And without having any clear amounts for what truly is the cost of the projects moving forward, all of this work that has been done and brain damage that has been done is worth nothing. And so I believe that there are two things that we should discuss and hopefully give some direction today, which is when are we having this election? And two, what are the real numbers, and give direction to the RTA to bring us much more realistic numbers, because our jurisdictions are out procuring projects. We're all seeing the least in terms of inflation in the prices that we've had, that we see the least is 40% increase in the jobs that we have in front of us. So I would like to move in that direction, and I really don't think that there is any consensus with TMC, not just with TMC and CAC, but even with this board. The city of Tucson and my colleagues on the council have made it super clear that without a high capacity transit project for the city of Tucson, there's going to be members on my council that will not support the RTA next. So at the end of the day, today, we have no real date for the election. We have no real consensus, and we have no real numbers. And it would be a fool's errand to move forward with the situation that we have today.
Thank you. Maybe we let Mr. Rosema have a turn, and then we can go on with our discussion.
Mr. Chair and members, I really don't know that I can add anything. I think that Carmine's summary of what we've been dealing with over the last number of weeks is accurate and complete. So if there's any specific questions, I think either Carmine or myself would be happy to answer them. But I think the TMC has certainly worked in earnest, I think, to get where we believed we were supposed to get based on the direction we got from the board. And I believe that we got there. there has been, our participation with the CAC as liaisons. There has certainly been some 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of progress. But I think that what the TMC looked at was trying to provide back to the RTA within the framework that was provided and the guidelines that was provided, a plan that we believe would be successful and one that was worked on through an enormous amount of collaboration over the last year and a half.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just one quick comment.
General, and then I'm next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, I just want to make sure that my comments were not meant towards any of this discussion has been a waste of the time. If you've been a part of the CAC discussions, you've been part of the TMC discussions, there's been a lot of issues that have talked about that we're going to need to be talked about before we come up with a good, solid plan going forward. And I think to what Terry, what you just said is you're operating within the constraints we were giving them. I don't think we gave them good constraints. That's the point of what I'm saying. I think we've got an opportunity and we've got timing, assuming nobody's trying to get to the ballot before sometime in 25. I think we've got an opportunity to breathe, give them more guidance, and also let them continue their conversations because they have come a long way. CAC got to an 18-6 vote on a plan. The TMC, through the ad hoc committee and others that some yeoman's work, have come together to try to figure these things out. There is prioritization, and it's not going to be, I'm not saying we're going to wipe the slate clean because that would be a huge mistake. We are really close now, and the 2 organizations continuing to work will get us to something that I think we can get across the finish line. I just think we need to provide them guidance and let them know, because I got more than one phone calls from people saying, you try to raise this tax increase and that's the death nail of the RTA. Well, that's what we do. We're supposed to establish those policies. So we need to have those conversations. But the TMC and the CAC have been working overtime and then some in very difficult environments and quite often in very contentious environments. I think they've done a great job of bringing all the options to us with the guidance we've given them thus far and the support. Thank you.
I pretty passionate about this thing, as you probably have figured out over the last months, but a few members of the CAC I talked to after the meeting, and some of them voted for moving that forward because they really thought the questions that they were trying to answer there should be answered in this board and have to be answered. And there's several things that we have to look at. I can tell you one of the projects we have on the capital projects, we've done preliminary research on it, and it came in at over 100% more than it was originally planned for. So the plans are coming in pretty high. I'm not a big supporter, and I can tell you the town of Marana is not a big supporter of going to 6/10. And people say it's only 1/10 of a cent. It's $460 million over 20 years. I mean, let's put that in perspective. It's not a couple of bucks. It's a 20% increase over what the RTA is now. So it would be $460 million more. And I'll tell you why it could be hard for a lot of us. My community just approved the 1/2-cent sales tax for a new community center, recreation aquatic center. Mayor Winfield's community has a 1/2 cent for the Naranjo Park and a lot of the things you were doing. Mayor Romero's community just passed a 1/2 cent. We're getting taxed to death. And adding $460 million, Mayor, you had said there are things your council won't live with.
Yeah.
This is kind of a red line for my people. And I hope we can stay at the 5/10 and do the projects. Another thing is taking contingency money out. Mayor Murphy stole part of my spiel, but a lot of times that's not enough. And I'll give you an example of RTA 1. We anticipated and we gave it the rosy, we're going to make this much, and kind of programmed projects in at the most we thought we could get. We didn't come close. In fact, the 230 million that we're looking at shifting from RTA next had help from about 350 million that came from PAG to shore up RTA to even get us this far. Or we'd have been $700 million short. And a whole lot of projects wouldn't have been done. We don't want to do that in RTA next. That roughly 50 million that PAG has should be shared between all of us for other projects other than transportation is very important, but there are other things that are really important in our county. And I don't want to steal that money again. So I'm kind of looking at the fact I liked what the TMC and the CAC working group originally came up with and sent to us. And I think Mayor Romero in general and Maxwell and others have said some of those may not be realistic. I mean, we're looking at projects, our smallest project we had on there was 20 million and the bids are coming in at 42. I mean, that's twice what we had looked at, and I don't foresee it getting any better. I do agree. I don't agree with the idea that staying at 5/10 is going to less money. We're going at 5/10, but products that we tax are going up at a faster rate. I mean, go to anywhere, a hardware store or buy a car or something like that. I mean, they've gone up, some things 30 and 40% over the last 2 or 3 years. I think we'll collect an equivalent amount of money. But I think we need to stay within the parameters. And I think we're making it too complicated. We're getting too big, or we're taking too much money, or we're switching too much money. And RTA 1 worked pretty well, other than the fact we were $700 million short in a $2 billion project, which is 35% is what we were short the last time. I'm a more conservative, and I'm not talking politically, I'm more conservative on what we want to, if we plan for a whole bunch of stuff, if we don't take into, I think Romero was exactly right. If we don't take into consideration the cost of those projects, we're going to get halfway through RTA next if we're successful to get it through the voters and run out of money. And so I think we need to seriously look at what we're doing. I don't have a problem with the election being next year in May, but I can tell you, looking at what's happening, it's not an RTA at MAG, it's a different thing, but they're talking about $600 million worth of loss that maybe the state's going to have to pick up a lot of those costs up there in the great state of Maricopa. And we have a little different situation here, but if we don't go forward, I think it's a huge loss for all of us, but we need to be careful how we go forward. Next. Mayor Murphy and then Mayor
Supervisor. No, you go ahead, Mayor.
No, I agree with Ted that certainly we have to have a date to back up on. It really goes to Priscilla's point earlier. Whatever that date is, you have to back yourself up on. I do think we need good figures because of what was mentioned previously. I'm with Mayor Honey on I go back to my school board days, many years on the school board. It's a whole different marketing campaign of a continuation of a half cent. I know it seems a little frivolous, but when you start, especially with the challenges in the economy, when you start to go up, I'm not asking for what I asked for before. I'm asking for that and more from you. And we're all watching the news and credit debt going off the charts, all of that. I think we lose a huge marketing opportunity not to understand the struggles of our residents. And to me, the minimum or the maximum that I think we can get through is the half cent. So I think, we start with the date, we back it up. I think we continually communicate. We're only going to ask what we've asked before. We find the numbers and then figure out how to go forward from there. But I think it's a good discussion to have, but I think those are some really good points to hit on and to include the commitment that we're going to stay at the half cent. And then to Priscilla's point, if we roll it out and we have all of our residents say, please, I'll give you more of my money for these, we listen to our residents. We could come back. I'm expecting it. That's not going to happen. But I think it's very important to get it out on the street, certainly as quickly as we can, backing into the date. But I'm with you. I think anything over a half cent. I always say 100% of nothing is still nothing. And if we don't learn by our county bonds before you that, went before the voters twice, 100% of whatever we can get is a really, really good deal. And I guess I'll leave it there.
Supervisor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a lot of discussions about all of these issues at the county level prior to this meeting. And perhaps the most important conclusion we reached is that the CAC needs and deserves more time to engage in dialogue with each other and with the TMC in order to get to a more consensual position. We also feel that it would be premature to vote in favor of a 0.6 tax rate at this time, and that it would also be premature to say that any rate higher than the existing 0.5 can never be discussed. In our opinion, all options need to stay on the table at this very early stage. This matter hasn't been mentioned today, but we talked about it coming into this meeting. The county also supports our previous unanimous decision to go with the conservative or pessimistic revenue projections from Eller. Based on the experience with the current RTA plan, we feel it would be easier to allocate revenue that comes in higher than projections than to, again, be forced to commit other regional funds to make up for any shortfalls. So with all of those thoughts in mind, I do have a motion that I think will help us to move forward. And it would be this: the CAC, working in partnership with the TMC, shall have until September 27 to prioritize projects using the updated cost estimates and assuming a 0.5 tax rate, and to determine the amount allocated to each of the elements and sub-elements. At its September 28th meeting, the RTA board can either accept the draft plan from the CAC or provide further direction.
I'll second that.
Thank you, member.
Wow, Mayor Winfield.
How did you arrive at that September date? Our next meeting is September 28th. And what I did was give the CAC until the day before our next meeting, because as Mr. Benavides knows, we write our agendas broadly enough that they could take up until that time, and we would still be able to discuss what they come up with at our meeting.
I'm in a line with the May 25th, November 25th in terms of bringing the ballot. I don't know, General Maxwell, if you clearly came into the meeting with that in mind and with timing. I'm curious if you developed a timeline.
Mr. Chair, if I can respond to that, Mayor Winfield, thank you. I've got my timeline. I was looking at it as more of a January meeting timeframe in September. I'd be really concerned, Supervisor Scott, if we're just going to kick it to the next meeting and then to the next meeting and then the next meeting. The executive director and the staff probably are the ones that can give us how to back it off. But if we go with May of 25, you can back off when you have to have it done. The final changes made. You can back all that up 6 or 9 months. I think 9 months is what we are targeting predominantly for our outreach with the public. You can back all that up. And the way when I did that in my brain, it came down to about a January deadline, which means we've got now some time for the TMC and CMC to work through CAC and work through it. We can then take that time also and address if we want to address the tax rate issue or not, because like you said, it is premature. We're not going to have an answer for them by September 1st. September meeting. And right now, the CAC's whole premise is on the 0.6. And I know there's discussion of the policies they didn't get to talk to, talking to us about going to the baseline instead of the pessimistic side, because that covered if you don't want to go to 0.6. So I think we owe it to give them more timing and therefore also give them more specifics and more timing. And I'm not even sure, Executive Director, if you've got a date of when we realistically will have those new accurate projected numbers, if we don't already.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Mr. Maxwell, they already have those preliminary cost estimates, individual jurisdictions, sponsor their projects. They're looking at the cost estimates. They're potentially going to have to consider some minor scope changes. So all of that is already in their hands, and hopefully we'll have those fine-tuned within the next month or so. But that's part of the decision-making process. So the decision point becomes, and you touched on it, I believe you said you spoken to some folks already, that based on TMC's discussion, they've already prioritized projects and they may have to redo that, and that's part of the process. But there is a recognition, and it's always been a recognition all along, that once we have the final cost estimates, we would have to go back and make adjustments again. So they know that's coming. They're working on it as we speak. As I said, a few folks have already mentioned that they're looking at rescoping some of their individual submitted projects to bring it back into budget. But if I may, the only point here would be critical to maybe provide direction is on that ½ versus 0.6, because we're moving in two different directions. But if we can converge both GAC and TMC back on at least looking at the 0.6, then that'll be really helpful in my opinion. And I don't know if Carmine or Terry want to comment on that as well, but I really believe that direction would bring people back, hopefully align them to focus on the outcome instead of going two different directions.
Understand. And so what I heard you just say is right now they've got some of the updated numbers they're putting together and trying to determine whether they want to rescope or reallocate the budget they're going to have. And you said we might have that information in a month.
They already have it.
No, they have it, but the
committees
new
have not received it, but individual jurisdictions have that information.
So, I mean, what we need is we need the final project numbers that they think are going to be most accurate going forward, whether they've either rescoped manner or not.
Yep.
Until we have that list, we're creating a plan that we know is not doable.
Mayor,
Mahoney, I believe that the city of Tucson has our current numbers. Actually, I don't believe I know we have our current numbers, and they are double the original costs that we had previously thought. I like the motion, Supervisor Scott, but I think we just need to get it right and be able to give the time to the CAC and TMC with the new numbers to really rethink what we do. I think in today's meeting, we could decide on a potential date for the election. I like the idea of a spring 2025 election. And that way we give clarity to both TMC and CAC as to when we believe we'd like to go as a board. Believe it or not, Mayor Honey, I believe that we should keep it at a ½ and 0.5 instead of 0.6, even though it's 1/10 cent. I just want to be as realistic as possible in terms of what other jurisdictions and their residents can accept as a recommendation for investment in transit and transportation. But I do want to at least be able to say, okay, if the numbers are so bad that we are not going to get a lot from a ½ cent, I do want to at least leave the door open to at least have that future discussion. But for now, make it just ½ cent. And yeah, I think those new numbers are going to completely change the conversation, both at the CAC and TMC, as to what we can get done with a pessimistic perspective, because I too agree that it will not be responsible to have a rosy picture when in fact we've gone through this before, right? We need to learn from our mistakes, and we need to be as conservative as possible as we move forward. So I don't know, Supervisor Scott, if you wanted to give maybe possibly more time.
Well, if I could speak to that, although, did you want to say something?
Well, I just,
more?
what are our, other than September, because I forget, what are the other meetings for the rest of the year? Scheduled meetings, do you know, Jack?
December 7th, because of November being a holiday, obviously.
So, back to I think, January, we're gonna waste all that time anyways with Christmas and everything else. I would be open to a slight modification to the November meeting as opposed to the September one to give them more time. But I think
December.
Oh,
We don't meet
December.
in November.
Yeah,
We meet early.
Thanksgiving holiday in December.
yes, yeah, the December meeting as opposed to January, because I think all that time is gonna be wasted anyways. And I think we still have to be, be motivated to kind of move it forward. And if we really are still waiting for the updated numbers, maybe September, is a little too quick, but I think January, you use whatever time you have, and I'd rather kind of at least keep it a little tighter.
So here's why the county made that motion. We are continually hearing from the CAC and the TMC that they need more direction from the RTA board. We've seen our cost estimates as well. But we also know that some of the other jurisdictions are waiting to see them. We thought a 60-day timeframe, 60 days from this meeting, was very reasonable. And then based on what happens during those 60 days as defined by the motion, then this board can provide additional direction in September. I'm concerned that if we amend the motion to say they have until the December meeting, then our opportunity to offer additional guidance and direction waits until then. I'd rather have that 60-day time frame and then have a check-in in September and provide the CAC or the TMC with additional guidance and direction. Having said that, I have no problem amending the motion to set an election date of spring of 2025.
General Maxwell.
Mr. Chair, all I'm trying to do, help me out, because Mr. McGovern walked to the podium, so I'm assuming that means he has something to add. So I was just trying to get attention to allow Mr. McGovern to comment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point out that in my brief remarks at the beginning, I indicated that our meeting on Monday included an agenda item that would bring us back to the 0.5-cent sales tax proposal so that we could work more closely with the TMC. Another thing that we intend to pursue is the prioritization of the projects. We've used tools that we developed to prioritize projects from the CAC's perspective. We've worked on that with the TMC. We've provided scoring. And so we have a number of different tools, if you will, that help us to do that. But what we don't have at this point is an up-to-date 1 through 36 ranking of the projects. If it comes to the point where there are no more changes in scope that can save us money, we're going to have to be able to look at projects that can be funded, regardless of how much money we find out we actually need when these cost proposals or cost estimates are completed, as well as whatever we decide and whatever the CAC's further direction might be about how many named projects versus funding of the categoricals. All that is still somewhat up in the air, but that process of working with the TMC to prioritize the projects in order for us to have a tool for looking at where we would cut projects and both for the CAC's proposal as well as for whatever bad news comes from the cost estimates, I think is important, and we'll be working on that immediately.
Mr. Chair,
Thank
could
you.
I ask Mr. McGovern, if you were sitting up here, would you like to see a September deadline or a December deadline?
I really want to come back in September and show you all that we've accomplished. I think December is more realistic as far as a deadline for a complete proposal. I would envision at this time that the proposal would be a 0.5-cent sales tax proposal that had been vetted and as much collaboration and cooperation as possible with the TMC, such that perhaps a single program would be provided to you, perhaps ones that were somewhat different but closer together, as well as those suggestions to you about how you might fund or what you should do, what we think should be done in terms of policies that would go along with these proposals. So in essence, a full or fairly full RTA next draft plan as is our requirement.
Thank you. Mayor Romero.
Chairman, I have a question. I agree with the logic that Supervisor Scott has brought us, right? That there should be a point in time soon so that the board can give feedback and input as to what the TMC and the CAC brings us. But I know we've done this before, maybe with the possibility of having a RTA board meeting at the end of October, possibly, to have like at least a touch-in. We've had one recently that was just the RTA board meeting and not the PAG. We could possibly have an end of October RTA board meeting where we kind of touch in, see what's happening, and give additional input and feedback and direction if possible. And then with the goal of coming back in December and having a more complete plan. I don't know, it's just an idea so that we don't have to wait until December to see a draft concept of an RTA next plan.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, I mean, nobody's proposing that we take the requirement for the CAC and the TMC to come report to us for each RTA board meeting. So they're coming back to the meeting in September or not, right, to come back and tell us where they're going. So I think we're going to get the updates. What I didn't want to do by putting another deadline on them at the next meeting is a lot of the decisions are getting curtailed. I mean, we heard it today that they made decisions based on they had a July deadline to get us something. I'd rather see them come back in September. And if they've got the plan ironed out by September on both sides, they can bring it back and present it to us in September. You know, I do think it's important we establish the date. And then I'd like at that point, the executive director, not for immediate action now, but to come up with a date of where they think realistically is the latest we can approve a plan and still give the adequate time to engage with the public and get feedback, make changes and get onto the ballot by the spring of 2025. But so many of the discussions, both at the CAC level and the TMC level, have been revolving around this due date for this plan. And we are not at a point yet where we're at a deadline for a plan. So I'd hate to impose another one. I appreciate your willingness to change your motion to establish this board's desired goal. And I also seem to be hearing a consensus around this table to also establish we only want them working on a 0.5-cent plan. I mean, if we all come back at the end of the day and say there's not enough in here to get the voters never going to come on board, then we have to have the discussion whether we want to adjust the price, but we don't have to start by adjusting.
Mr. Chair, listening to all my colleagues, and for me, this is consistent with what we've been doing for the last 3 years. We try and work to find a place where we can all land. So if it's acceptable to my second, I will amend the motion to change the date to the December meeting, knowing that we are going to have a check-in with them at the September meeting. and to add that we will set the election date for spring of 2025.
Second.
Thank you.
You know, I heard somebody call for the question.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Were you about to do that?
Call for the question.
May I please ask to,
30 seconds.
may I please ask to confirm the half cent versus anything above as well? Because I think that.
Well, that's
That
not the
helps.
motion.
It's in the motion.
The half cent? Yeah.
It is in the
Oh, I
motion.
didn't pick that up.
Yes.
In the
It
motion.
is.
And Mr. Chair, just
30
want to
seconds.
offer a friendly amendment. I'd also like to include in the motion the limitation on the pessimistic view. That way, we've set the boundaries for what they want to go. And again, we can always change the view, but this way we're giving them clear guidance.
General Maxwell, thank you. I would more than accept that if Mayor Murphy is willing.
Okay, somebody called for the question.
Again, I apologize. Just to be clear, would you mind repeating the motion with the amendments?
We all want to hear it.
Oh, no. Yeah, this, hold on just a second. I can do this. Okay, the CAC, working in partnership with the TMC, shall have until December 7, that was our December meeting, to prioritize projects using the updated cost estimates and assuming a 0.5 tax rate, and to determine the amount allocated to each of the elements and sub-elements. At its December 7 meeting, I'm sorry, that should say December 6 for them, because at its December 7 meeting, the RTA board can either accept the draft plan from the CAC or provide further direction. We also re-endorse our adoption of the conservative / pessimistic revenue objections that we got from the Eller College, and we agree that we will set the election in spring of 2025.
Okay, the question's been called for. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Wow. Anybody want to adjourn? We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye, opposed? Anybody opposed? I'll use them. We are adjourned.